I know we all look for things to save energy and to be more ecology conscious. And so when my granddaughter came to me with a suggestion, I asked her if she would please talk to you folks about it. This is Elizabeth, and she has a couple of items that she has found that work good for her.
Elizabeth. Hi, as my grandpa said, I'm Elizabeth. I recently graduated from Brookings Harbor High School, and I now go to SWAC. One of my favorite plastic-free switches, I brought a couple of them today, is shampoo bars. As many of you who have cleaned up beaches have probably found shampoo bottles. And they're really simple. They actually last a lot longer than plastic bottles. It's just a bar, like any regular bar, so it comes with instructions. It's pretty funny. It tells you to wash your hair with it, pretty much.
Where do you buy it?
I go to Chargin Valley Soap. It's online. There are a lot of different companies that sell it. And when it comes in the mail, it's completely plastic free. They make a really big deal about that. It's really awesome. My next one, or this was actually my first switch, if I can find it, is a plastic-free lip tint, but it also works as a really awesome chapstick, and works the same. Push it up, but it's all basically cardboard, and so no plastic packaging at all on this.
How does it do in the heat?
It has never melted, which is way better than any other chapstick I've ever had. Yeah, even today. My next one, this one is really popular on social media right now. It's bamboo toothbrushes. The bristles are still plastic, but everything else is biodegradable. I wouldn't recommend the company I got it from. I can't remember their name because they did have plastic packaging when it came in the mail. Obviously, my tote bag is my favorite for grocery shopping and just going around town with. I wasn't able to bring the actual product for this one. It's bamboo reusable paper towels, and you can wash them up to 100 times, and you can get a sample of them at Gold Beach Lumber. Thank you.
Your father is...
Yes, my father owns it. But it also comes with a $2 coupon for an entire roll of the package. And they're really awesome. It works like any other paper towel, and you can reuse them, wash them in the dishwasher, washing machine, or just by hand. And they're just one of my favorite switches so far.
They're a great product. I use them.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
they are.
So you're keeping the plastic out of the stream in the first place?
Yeah.
Do you have any formulas for shampoo that you can make yourself at home?
I don't. I do have one. So it takes a while for your hair to get used to the natural soap because it doesn't have all the harsh chemicals that store-bought soap does have. And they had recipes for a apple cider vinegar rinse that I do make at home. And I actually use an old soap bottle to dispense it, so reusing some plastic that I would have thrown away in the past, which is really fun. I like finding little tips and tricks for that as well.
So it doesn't do this to your hair though, does it?
No, the color is completely separate. It does not turn it purple every time. I wish it did. That'd be a lot cheaper. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions on any of the products or anything else?
Can I look at the paper about the paper towels?
Yeah, of course.
At Gold Beach? Thank you.
They sell them at Freddy's too.
Oh,
just by the way.
Sure.
I did just subscribe to that Rose company. Have you heard of them?
I have not.
They're sending a really cool package out right now that includes paper towels and toilet paper and
Yeah.
Kleenex, all made from bamboo.
Oh, wow.
It's not reusable.
Yeah.
I don't
It'd be hard to
think-
make reusable paper.
I don't think you'd want that.
Yeah.
But they include many Myers cleaning products for free this month with a subscription to, with a certain amount of purchase.
Yeah.
I think it was like a $20 purchase or something.
I've seen something kind of similar to that with the cleaning aspect where they send you a bottle of very concentrated, thank you, soap, and so you use it, you add it to some water in an old soap bottle. It helps you from buying new soap from the store.
Well, they actually included a weighted bottle that's heavier at the bottom,
Yeah.
and a tub to put everything in, and a loofah sponge, and, I mean, it was a lot for free.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
awesome.
they, of course, have you on their list so they can ask you to buy more.
Yes. That's what I found with a lot of my products. They're always like, hey, do you want to buy more? And I was like, I haven't finished with your first one, so no. I also had a suggestion on plastic bags. I know for myself, I have a ton of them around my house, just shoved in little nooks and crannies. And one thing you can do is, fold them up and keep them in your purse or your pockets if you can fold them tiny enough. And you can carry them around, so you're reusing that plastic as well instead of buying a tote bag or another reusable bag.
Okay, thank you.
Yay! Now, do you have a wife? Give her
Thank you, dear.
ecology in the whole family.
It's exciting to me to see young folks grasping this need to conserve. So I appreciated when Elizabeth told me about this. I have a couple announcements. First, if you want more suggestions, we have some in the card that's in the front of the room here, suggestions on how you can save energy. Burma Madison asked me to announce that the One Planet, One Ocean program is going to be shown at the college on Thursdays from 2:30 to 4. First class will be this coming Thursday. No, October 3rd, I'm sorry. And it's in the edX format. Bill Gorham also has a program being offered at the college. Did you want to say a word about MOOC?
Well, what Ed's talking about, that Burma was saying, the one planet, one planet, one ocean. What is it, a massive online, open online course, so MOOC. Basically, you, at your own pace, you go through a series of lectures, presentations that are on the order of 10 minutes long. And so when you've done with the unit, that allows you to then sit and discuss it. They're not trying to get across one point of view or another aside from, let's say, the ocean. And so it allows you to then, it challenges you to think about stuff. And then the course, or the get-together, if I understand it completely, is more of a discussion. Talk about what you've read and what you've seen. And so it goes through a series of 5 sessions to make you think. Now, what Ed was talking about, my presentation on the 5th of November, I'm going to be at the college at 6 o'clock, going to give a talk about climate change. And it's a little bit about what's going on, what can we do about, will we do anything about it? And part of that is to stimulate your ideas to think about what should we do about it. And I'm working with Doug Ginn and trying to get a course in January we're talking about a more expanded set of discussions on climate change. So that, keep posted.
Thank you. A lot of other things are going on. Del Norte County has a week of workshops and demonstrations they're working on. Their flyer is on the back table. Today, the IPCC sent out a report on oceans, special report on ocean and cryosphere in the changing climate. This is the front page of the IPCC report. It's not hard to read. I urge you to look through it. The New York Times did an excerpt on the same program. Also easy reading and lots of information. Time magazine, if you saw it on the newsstand, how Earth survived in 2050. 100% of this double edition is on climate change. And then I need to announce that our speaker for next month will be Tom Suchanek. who is a research scientist from UC Davis. And he's going to talk about the causes and solutions to the environmental problems of climate change.
Sorry.
We are Coastal SOCAN. We're part of the Southern Oregon Climate Change Now organization.
I'll interrupt you just for a sec. If you want to see the IPCC report, can you just go online and put it in Google and find it that way? Is there a good way to find it?
Well, I did that, yes, and I did find it, but I also got an email that sent it to me. But yeah, Bill, is that a good way to get it, is to just put in, to
Yeah.
do a Google
Because
search?
it comes out every month and it's like up to date with everything. It's a really great thing to look at.
It's today, it came out
Yeah.
today, yeah. So I mentioned we're part of SOCAN. SOCAN is a Medford organization, and our goal is to educate and solicit action to combat climate change. Your donations are always welcome, either cash or check. We have a small container in the back. And if you haven't signed in, there's a sign-in sheet going around, please do that.
Tax deductible.
Yeah, that's right.
Tax deductible, yes. We're a nonprofit organization. So let me say a word or two about Miranda. I first met Miranda Gray at a Watersheds partnership meeting, and my next meeting with her was at the Cherish the Chetco event, where we did a lot of cleaning of the Chetco. Kayaks were put in the river to clean the shores that we couldn't get to by foot, and a lot of foot soldiers went to the beaches to do cleanup. I think, my guess was there were 50 people,
Yes.
about 50 people, men and women, all political interests that participated in this. It was an exciting and useful event.
And you might mention that the
Pardon me?
Fishermen's Association was also a sponsor of it.
South Coast.
Yay.
Fishermen's, yeah, there were 9 sponsors?
Yeah, partners, I would say.
Partners,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, 9 partners. Fishermen was one of the groups that partnered with us, with Miranda. So here is Miranda Gray, and she's going to talk to us about watersheds.
Thanks, Ed, and thank you all for
Yay.
inviting me to present tonight. I've met lots of you at various meetings, the Cherish the Chetco event that Ed mentioned, but that was part of our kind of outreach and education program. I'm going to talk a little bit more today about the Curry Watersheds Partnership Restoration Program, and I wouldn't say how we are combating climate change, but how we are combating the effects of climate change. Let's see, the team that is a part of this restoration program is all of these folks listed here. Part of the Curry Watersheds Partnership Office. I am the coordinator for the South Coast Watershed Council, and maybe just a bit more about myself. I'm from New Mexico originally, and then took a pretty roundabout way to get here. I'm in Gold Beach. That's where our office is. And so I've been in this role as coordinator for less than a year now, still very much learning the issues that we're dealing with and the people that are involved. But I do have a background in environmental science and policy, and I've had the opportunity to work with different conservation and restoration nonprofits, as well as some different state and federal agencies. So a varied background that all kind of contributes to the role I'm in now. This restoration program has been going on for about 25 years now. I think audiences like yourselves don't know a whole lot about what we do here in the Chetco watershed, but throughout Curry County. So I'm here to kind of pull that out from behind the curtain and let you know what some of our objectives are, how it fits into the context of climate change, and yeah, just generally what we do and why we do it. to ask questions as we go, I think that's how we do things around here. So our service area is most of the watersheds in Curry County. I focus on those areas that are filled in brown there, and then Kelly Timchak, who was listed on the previous slide, and some of you may know, she's focused on that blue area there. So that's the Lower Rogue watershed, and the rest we just refer to as the South Coast watersheds. Starting just with the basics, what is restoration? It is a gradient of activities that span kind of creating habitat to recovering habitat that's been lost, or just letting the land rehabilitate. So most of what we focus on is considered active restoration, so we're out on the ground using big machinery like this, creating that new habitat. But a lot of the important part of restoration is also passive restoration, so just protection, letting things recover. We partner also with the Wild Rivers Land Trust. I think you all heard from Anne, the ED of that organization. So protection is a big an important component of restoration plans, but because our watersheds have become so impacted and degraded, restoration is critically needed. And that's my next slide. Why is restoration needed? Some of the largest impacts to our watersheds occurred starting in the late 19th century and really came about as a result of a more mechanized way of doing things. So deforesting large areas, intensified agriculture, channelizing these streams, and kind of taking away habitat from our wildlife. Restoration is just a way to improve those conditions, improve upon those impacts that we've made to our watersheds. And a watershed, maybe some of you don't quite know what a watershed is. It's an area of land, so it's that area of land that drains rainwater and snowmelt into a tributary system and then drains into a common river body. So here we are in the Chetco River watershed. And then the processes that we refer to are all of those interactions between that river system, the tributaries, and the land. So you can't see this picture very well, but at the zoomed out big watershed scale, we can think about erosion processes, so taking sediment off of the land and delivering it through the river system. There are processes that are taking place at the stream segment scale, the reach scale, and those are things like riparian functions, so plant growth, plant succession, and what those plants provide for that stream reach. And then there are things going on at the more micro scale within the stream itself, so species interactions and population dynamics, things like that. And so a lot of our restoration work is very site-specific, but we still need that understanding of all of these watershed processes. It's all very connected, so if we go out to improve stream habitat in a reach without addressing maybe a larger issue of erosion upstream, we're not going to be all that successful. So we really have to understand everything that's going on.
Has the wildfires been a big impact on the sediment coming down?
Nothing's been determined for certain. But yeah, I actually have a photo of the Chetco burn scar in here, and I'm sure there's some, yeah, but how much, it's kind of hard to say unless you really do that. Sediment delivery is a very hard thing to track. How far back it's coming from and where it's coming from exactly.
Well, it's non-point specific, yeah. What about the logging?
Yeah, I would say it has, I mean, when it's clear-cut logging, it has a similar effect of denuding from wildfire, and vegetation is there for a reason, and it's tough when you take it all away.
You mentioned riparian. What do you mean by riparian?
Riparian is the corridor along a stream system, a stream itself. So it's the vegetation that you find along a stream. It's generally riparian areas are densely vegetated because they have that water source. They're diverse. They have their kind of own microclimate, so they're really, really important for fish, but also the other species that live amongst them. Yeah.
Here's a question. For example, following the Chetco wildfire, do you know, were there any programs for reseeding or protection of the massive erosion which can happen following a fire like that, and siltation to the river and the creeks?
Yeah, was there any response to that? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, has there been anything like that done, or?
Well, the Forest Service has a kind of immediate post-fire burn plan, and so that's where they identify what's needed to rehabilitate the lands after a fire. For private lands, there's not so much a consolidated effort to do that. The council we did, Matt Swanson, who works for a contracting company with us, he sat on the governor's fire response team, so it was a stakeholder team that came up with priorities, and he received a grant to assess assess the burned areas on private lands. So we are probably going to do a little bit of sediment retention projects on private lands as a result of that. Yeah. That is something, though, that I think we need to think more critically about how to respond to these fires in a more timely manner. Let's see, so I'll talk a little bit about how we work to restore some of those watershed processes and the objectives and how we do it. So one of those processes is referred to as connectivity. And this can be upstream, downstream connectivity, so maintaining the flux of materials, of wood, of sediment through stream systems, but also the movement and migration of fish and other biota through our systems. We have a lot of fish species here that Dave could talk extensively about that need that ability to move and pass through things. So one of our objectives or methods is to remove or modify barriers to that connectivity. But we also work to restore the lateral connectivity. So that's the connectivity between the stream channel and its floodplain. So allowing the water to sit on the land more and also provide habitat out of the channel. There are a lot of species that need that more protective habitat out of the stream, lower velocities, etc. So some of the work we do is to reconnect the river channel to its floodplain.
So does that have implications in terms of if you can't reach a floodplain in a certain area, then it's more likely to flood in some other place in a way you don't want, things like that, when you say about floodplain function?
Yeah, floodplain function is basically that providing that habitat, filtering pollutants.
So it also is going to help you absorb the water into the land instead of just running off to the sea and all that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Recharging underground aquifers.
Hasn't it been built on in a lot of places?
The floodplain, yeah. That's another issue is
Yeah.
creating impervious surfaces where water should be allowed to soak into the land.
Miranda, you say remove or modify barriers. What would be examples of some barriers?
I'm gonna get to that.
Stay tuned.
But yeah, the most common barrier is our roads. So a lot of what we do when we can't actually decommission a road is create passage through those roads. So we do a lot of bridge placement projects. And those are kind of the ideal solution if you can't get rid of a road, because they're large span bridges, and so they allow for that natural movement of the stream, both side to side and also vertically. And it's also a great way to work with landowners. So a lot of the roads around here that aren't on public lands are on private timber or agricultural lands. So we can kind of provide this financial incentive to landowners, and they in turn can help us with maintenance or installation of those bridges. Another common method on generally smaller streams are removal of usually our undersized culverts, or they're kind of round culverts that don't have natural bottoms. So we install a lot of these countersunk arch culverts, and they allow you to install a kind of natural stream bed through them and are wide enough to accommodate the movement of the stream.
Isn't placement also something to consider? Because sometimes you don't want it to constrict the flow in certain areas. It's an unnatural restriction.
Yeah, you definitely,
Yeah.
you want it to be wide. And we'll do pretty extensive topographic surveys out in the field before we actually put these on the ground, and have a good understanding of where they need to go relative to the center of the stream channel. This is an example of restoring that floodplain connection. And yeah, generally you need to have an area, a landowner, just kind of land use that you can be a little bit flexible with, because it is going to flood the land. This is Sullivan Gulch in the Sixes River watershed. So this is Cape Blanco State Park in the estuary. Sullivan Gulch was ditched and drained in the late 19th century to convert the land to cropland and pasture. So you can see in that top photo how narrow that channel is. And it was dug to about 10 to 15 feet. So it wouldn't allow the waters to get out of the bank. It also, there were a lot of beavers building dams there, but it would kind of clog things up because the water still didn't get out of its channel. It just continued to de-water the wetlands in that area. It's a really cool, diverse habitat. So that project was put in before I got here, but probably about 4 years ago. They actually raised the bed elevation of that ditched channel and then excavated new meandering channel, and then also dug out some big off-channel alcoves, so creating that floodplain habitat. This is a picture of some of that floodplain that was created. Large wood was put in there for habitat. But yeah, it's a really neat area if you make it out there. There's old growth Sitka spruce, and it's really important for some migratory waterfowl. There's some rare plant communities, a lot of native fishes.
Did you return it to the natural meander?
I believe so, yeah.
So, beavers aren't a good thing? I always thought beavers were good because they made ponds and stuff.
No, they're a great thing, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're great where they don't interfere with other land uses. I was just trying to say that channel was ditched, so it was so incised that beavers were building dams but it was kind of just blocking the flow of things. It wasn't, still wasn't reaching its floodplain. But yeah, there are a lot of beavers out there.
Right.
So this is another watershed process, the kind of the delivery of sediment and different hydrologic processes. So our objective here is to restore more natural levels and timing of sediment and water runoff off of the land. And we do this mostly by, again, minimizing road impacts or decommissioning them where we can, and also stabilizing gullies. So I'll show a few examples of that.
You work with ODOT to decommission roads, or are they mostly private roads?
Yeah, they're mostly private roads.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't do a lot of work on public lands or state lands because they have kind of dedicated personnel for that and money.
Whose dog?
That's Matt's dog. I think that dog is in about half of the photos
cool
that we. Yeah, so we do a lot to improve road ditch drainage so that the water that's shedding off of the ground isn't coming directly off of the road surface. So it has kind of time to filter fine sediment before it reaches the stream channel. And again, another great way to work with landowners. Just kind of, it's a win-win situation for everybody when there's well-maintained roads. This is a gully. So these gullies form typically on highly erosive hillsides. So pasture lands that don't have a lot of vegetation, and they form when there's a really concentrated water flow that's moving really fast, and it just incisors, it cuts its way into these soils and grows pretty quickly once it forms, and it makes its way across those hillsides. So a way we deal with that is by putting in these rock dams at intermittent places along the gully, so that traps the sediment behind the dam, and it builds up that elevation. It's sediment that you can then put more vegetation into and kind of stabilize that ground.
It looks like a simple fix, but I don't think it's that simple.
It takes some time.
Yeah.
I mean, all in all, it's.
It gets the sediment out of the river.
This was the picture I was talking about on the Chetco bar burn scar on South Coast lands. So it took, it burned pretty bad in that area. And yeah, it's hard to say when these gullies started forming or how much worse the fire made them. But they were pretty bad. And one idea we had as a result of that governor's response team and the assessment work we've done was to, in a similar way that you would put rock dams in those pasture gullies, you would put just large wood in those gullies and help agrade the sediment and to fill in those the gullies so there's not so much unnatural flow of sediment.
How much damage was done to the soil, the rhizomes in the soil? Because it looks like it burned pretty hot there.
Yeah. Yeah, I also can't answer that. There were a lot of tan oak growing back in that area.
So that pile of wood there was put there deliberately then?
No, that was not.
That was not.
That we were just out kind of walking around that day.
Oh,
That was just a debris buildup. But it might,
The tan oaks that are up there, do they have the sudden death syndrome?
these were little
Little
seedlings.
Oh, okay.
They were newbies after after the fire.
Yeah.
Are you saying goalies or what are goalies?
Goalies.
Can you, oh, the gully, like
Yeah.
Goalie, yeah.
Okay. I just-
Royals.
I thought you said goalie.
Good question.
She's from out of state.
So here it's called a goalie? How do you say it?
Gully.
A gully?
Yeah,
In
gully.
New Mexico, there are royals, right?
Right, we don't even have that word in New Mexico.
That's devastating looking.
So back to the riparian functions and processes. A lot of our restoration work in riparian zones is to increase shade and reduce the stream temperatures for those aquatic species, increase the intrinsic riparian habitat. I don't know if I used the right word there, but just the habitat that riparian buffer provides for everything, and then increase the inputs of organic matter to feed the stream system. And we do that by planting native trees and shrubs and also removing invasive species. And another objective would be to reduce erosion and improve water quality in these riparian areas, and that is mostly done by fencing of livestock to keep them out of those riparian corridors and providing them with an off-stream water source. We also work with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have some incentive programs to set aside riparian areas on agricultural lands and kind of lease them from the agricultural producers to protect those buffers. So I said that planting is a big thing that we do. So that's just of trees, shrubs, grasses that we acquire from nurseries and wild stock sometimes. This, I think, is somewhere in the North County, but you can see that reference tree in the yellow circle and how that riparian vegetation has grown up over the years.
How many years do you think, about 10?
Yeah, that's probably 10 plus years.
Because that's going to lower the water temperature a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a part of it is once we get those plantings in the ground, there's a lot of maintenance that needs to take place before they become what they call free to grow. So releasing them from other plant competition, providing them with sunlight, protecting them from predators. And that's generally about a 5 to 7 year process. And it's, after that work is done, it's a lot on the landowner to become the maintainer of those riparian areas.
What's the success rate of the recovery?
The survival,
Yeah, about 80%, 90%?
I think it's lower than that. Yeah, I mean, but you plant a lot
Yeah.
in anticipation for that survival rate.
And what do you typically figure the active intervention on a restoration is? I mean, 2 years, 10 years? Does it, I'm sure it varies a lot.
I think it's been about, on average, 5 to 7 years. But that's kind of a hard thing to
Depending on
fund.
the drought, too. If there's a drought, you're going to have to be there longer.
Mhm. Yeah, there's lots of unknowns that come into play, but yeah, we do have a riparian manager who does a lot of this work, Drew Harper, and he's got it pretty dialed in. I mean, he's still figuring things out, but he's great.
What is he doing there that he has to have the helmet and all this? What's happening there? You know?
Just weed whacking.
Okay, that's all, just
Yeah.
protect him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and ear protection.
Mhm.
I can go be spraying or
And then removing the invasives goes hand in hand with planting natives. This is Jack Creek on Salmon Run Golf Course, removing Himalayan blackberry.
these.
So the invasives themselves don't pose any threat to the riparian system, but the problem is that they're just such good competitors that they take over. They create these monocultures that are a very bad replacement of what riparian vegetation should look like.
Do you find much Japanese knotweed?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of that up north especially. And then I mentioned fencing to keep livestock out, another great way to partner with landowners. And just kind of let the riparian buffers do their thing. And then installing these irrigated off-stream water sources that keep the livestock out of the stream. They do a lot of damage to take vegetation away and increase sediment and pollutants into the stream.
Probably less bacteria in the stream too.
So what's the partnership? Like, you provide all the materials and they allow you to come in, or does that landowner, because he's a private landowner, right? He has to provide the materials and you just provide the know-how? What's the relationship?
It varies, but generally, yeah, we provide financial incentives in the form of materials, and they often have large machinery and can do the labor themselves. So that's usually what it looks like.
Where does your funding come from for stuff like that?
A lot of it is through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and that is a state agency, and a lot of that money comes in response to the Oregon Plan for Salmon in Watersheds. And so that's one reason so much of our focus is on restoration of aquatic ecosystems. But we get funding from BLM, Forest Service, private WRCA is the Wild Rivers Coast Alliance, the private foundation, NOAA Fisheries. There's a lot we can piece together. But OEB is our biggest funder. And then we do a lot to restore more directly the end-stream habitat. So that is with the objective of creating or enhancing fish habitat. And often that's adding large wood to the stream for cover and more complex habitat. So a lot of the streams you see a lot around here are very simplified, straight channels that don't give the fish a lot to hide in, to take refuge in. So we try to create more of that pool, riffle habitat. And another form that may take is actually rehabilitating the grade of the channel, so getting streams to flow at a slower velocity, increasing that meander effect, which increases the amount of habitat that's available also. I would say that there's kind of two ways to go about that. You can reintroduce that meandering form by just excavating the channel. And that gives you a little bit more predictability of how the channel is going to respond. So often that's what we do around here because it works with the landowner preferences. Another way is to try to be a little bit more creative about it and reintroduce the process. So to just kind of create log jams that then aggregate sediment and flood the surrounding channels and floodplain in a less predictable way, but maybe more cost effective and just kind of how it would happen naturally.
So let the river own the floodplain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
take back it's what it wants to do naturally. So this is one type of putting log weirs in the stream channel, and this is a little bit more of a kind of permanent structure. It's keyed in pretty well into that channel to create that pool riffle habitat.
So is that a created, is the wares are created?
Yep.
Is it
Yeah.
concrete?
It's wood.
Wood, it's wood, huh? Okay, so it's gonna oxygenate down there too.
And more recently, I think it's just kind of been more the norm in this type of restoration is just to add more natural looking log jams, stuff that is maybe not as permanent, doesn't have as long of a lifespan, but it has that same effect, and it doesn't require near as much maintenance or upfront cost. A lot of these streams are just starved of wood around here.
Away from logging.
Now, those look burned, are those burned?
I think they're just leaf off.
Oh.
This is that meandering channel restoration that I was talking about. This is Morton Creek, tributary to the Elk River. And I'm not entirely sure when this was done or the length of the project, but it's pretty clear what was done. Looks good from sky. Some more photos again of that Sullivan Gulch project.
Oh, that's probably the very beginning of it with all the little specimens marked off.
Yep,
Yeah.
a lot of planting also. And there's a dog again.
Dogs love rivers.
More Sullivan Gulch.
So did the salmon get all the way up into these little
Mhm.
tributaries?
Oh, yeah, we put a
Yeah.
trap in there in the spring to see what we were seeing. And yeah, there were coho.
Cool. Yeah, because it's probably cool enough
Steal
for
it.
them to try it out. Yeah. Yeah, they need that refugia like that, yeah.
Yep. And here I thought I'd talk a little bit about climate change. I don't think we're quite, as an organization, thinking enough about restoration for a changing climate, so something that I really want to work on. There are a couple of approaches that we would take, and that would be predicting what future climate is going to look like and what that effect is going to be on stream temperatures mostly, flow levels. So I think it's anticipated that there's going to be much lower summer flows in these river systems. And then predicting also what the effect of restoration would be given those changes in climate. One great tool that we have in ecology is global climate models. I don't know how much you all know about those, but they're very sophisticated, integrated models that consider the interactions between oceans and land and atmosphere to predict what temperatures and precipitation are going to be well into the future. And they take these different scenarios of greenhouse gas emissions. So that spans vastly improving what we put into the atmosphere to much accelerated emissions. So you can look at kind of that range of prediction for the future. And then ideally, the product of that would be maps of priorities of where you would most want to do restoration and have an effect for the future.
So if something has grown there in the past, it may not be something you would restore in the future, because it may not make it.
Yeah, yeah. Habitats are probably going to change and where things are going to grow or survive. This is a cool example from the Grand Ronde River Basin in Northeast Oregon. So this type of stuff is very much happening in Oregon and could easily be done with the work that we're doing. This modeled the effects on, or the predicted stream temperatures in 2080, and then also predicted what the effect of riparian restoration would have on changing those future temperature levels. So then you can zero in on where restoration would have the most effect, like in that northern creek. You can see a really big change from about 25 degrees Celsius to something more like 15 degrees. So that might be a really important cold water refuge for fish in the future.
What's causing that big plume of warm water on the main stem of the Ronde?
It's probably pretty wide and main stem. I mean, generally the main stems are pretty warm.
So then I suppose in a situation like that, you're talking about the overhanging vegetation, those kinds of things to reduce the heat in the water. Any other parts to it?
You could probably modify the, in this case, stream channel in some way that it's that it keeps the water cooler. So maybe it's too wide in places and it's heating up that water too much. But yeah, I would say that riparian restoration is, planting is the most viable solution. And then this was a similar study in the Snohomish River Basin in Washington. So they modeled the predicted decreases in summer flow for 2040. And outlined in the circle there is the river basin, and it predicted about 35 to 70, so big spread, 35 to 70% lower summer flows. And then they also modeled what that effect would have on the percent changes in Chinook spawners. And so they're showing there a 10% decrease in spawner abundance if they don't do anything. They leave it as B, and upwards to 30% increase in spawners if they take really aggressive restoration action in that.
And that they did the action now.
Yeah.
Isn't it the flushing of the creek too? Bigger storms are going to cause more flushing?
Yeah. Bigger storm surges are predicted also. But that would be more so in the winter time. So the concern with lower flows is much more so in the summer. This is right here in our estuary. This was a study that was done just a couple of years ago, looking at the scenario of 4.5 feet of sea level rise, and based on that prediction, where the coastal tidal wetlands would be in the future. And I think that's based mostly kind of on elevation. And then they took that prediction and came up with priorities of those future coastal tidal wetlands. So we might look at that data and say that the highest priority, because of these factors, they took into account the area of that land migration zone. So that's where tidal vegetation is expected to migrate. So.
What did you say was the time frame on the 4.5 feet?
I think they looked pretty far out, 2100.
Oh, 2100?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I read that was giving us enough time to plan
Yeah,
protection and restoration efforts. Yeah.
yes.
That's up by the golf course, that one big chunk of it looks like.
20,
Yeah, I didn't look too closely at where exactly, but
yeah, 100
the
yards.
data is available if
It'll be
anybody's interested.
water golf.
Yeah.
Say 100 yards.
Yeah, well, 80 years.
Yeah, 80 years, not that long.
Not that long.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my final slide. Just want to encourage you all, as you are already doing. This group is great. Spread the word about how we can combat climate change and what's being done in these watersheds. If you're really ambitious, grant writing for a specific issue is sometimes a great way to get involved. I'm actually working with a gentleman in Port Orford who's really concerned about the public water system there. And so he's taking it upon himself, consulting with our organization to apply for grants, kind of feasibility study grants for the city. And so he's getting really invested in that, and it's, I think that cities and counties are really deprived of that type of resource, just grant writing, and people are really invested in an issue. Citizen science is there. I know that there's some opportunities to collect data for the sudden oak death. There's something called the King Tide Science Project. So collecting some data in our watershed that's informing a larger scientific effort. We don't have anything currently at our office, but it's something that we're looking to do. You can come to Watershed Council meetings. We have one tomorrow in the small annex room from 3 to 5 p.m. So
Across here?
mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, our council meetings are once a month, but we rotate since we're a big geography. We rotate, and we're here in Brookings once every 3 months. Financial donations are always accepted and well used, and just stay in touch and engaged.
And if you're a big landowner, contact them.
Yeah.
Miranda, thank you very much. That was very
Yeah.
good. What we wanted to do is that, as we've been doing in the last times, sort of build on what Miranda ended up with, and then how do you get involved? And one of the things that we got back from a lot of people was that, well, this is good. I'm getting educated. Knowing that something has to happen, but what should we do? How do we get involved? What are the specific things that we can take for making a difference? And you've given some really good examples. Maybe the first one of spread the word. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to the people talk to the people you may not typically talk to. I say that because as we're dealing with all these things, there's a tendency right now with the politicization of things, of polarization. You don't want to talk to other people, but it's going to be important that we all come to conclusion or come to some consensus as to how we move things forward. It's really important to understand what do we understand, and as you pointed out, there's a lot we don't understand. There's a lot of stuff that we need to know more about. So what we'd like to do now is have some ideas from your perspective. How do you think you could help in dealing with the restoration of some of these communities? Or could you offer some suggestions?
Well, it sure seems like all the things that you're doing, that if somebody has a little bit of land, that they can be doing it themselves on a small scale on their own property, like planting trees and protecting the stream and, you know, letting it back up and slow down. And all those principles that you're using are very applicable to our own properties and useful in terms of climate change to shelter that stream if you have one and so on. And just protecting habitat, planting trees, that kind of thing. Trees and bushes and all the rest of it.
Also, I think you should get involved with land use, because something, you know, keeping the development out of the floodplain and away from the river is only going to help the river.
Seems like to me the most important thing is to support those politicians that are supporting action for climate change. It's pretty tough to get anything done when politicians aren't in favor of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where educating to find out, well, what is the basis for this assumption or that assumption, this, and I use the word projection as opposed to prediction. I predict who's going to win the football game this Saturday. If I knew what were these different parameters, I could project what the outcome is so that I know that if that doesn't happen, then my projection doesn't have validity. And so when you look to what people say, notice if they're predicting what's going to happen, or as Miranda was saying, they've projected out to 2100, what would be the areas that would be affected if there was, what, 4 feet worth of sea level rise?
Yeah. One of the things I was really curious about when you said that is how does 4 feet impact the places where we draw the water out of the river? You know, we've already got salt for the harbor pull out, but the Chetco one, I mean the Brookings one is not that farther upstream.
Less than a mile.
Less than a mile, so that could very easily be impacted. Could you tell that when you looked at that up close or anything of that nature?
In relation to the water source?
Where the water's drawn out for Brookings?
I didn't look at it that closely, but
Does anybody else happen to
You
know?
have to know where it was, where the tubes and everything are, and where they gather all the water.
I need one.
The one in Harbor is definitely going
I
to be
need one.
impacted.
Yeah, it's already done.
Yeah, it already is.
It's not that expensive.
And one thing that I liked is the number 3 there,
Yeah.
For myself.
citizen science. I'm impressed working with Dave's group, with the fishermen that are working close with the DFW and trying to understand, collecting data to get involved. And you don't have to be a fully geared up fisherman to get out there. I mean, Dave, maybe you could say something about some of the programs that the fishermen are supporting.
Interesting, today we secured a grant, our organization, Oregon South Coast Fishermen. And so we secured a grant from this group called STAC, Salmon Trout Advisory Committee or Council. And so with that money, we did some habitat restoration on North Bank near Icebox, and then went on over to South Bank, the piling hole we call it, and so did some restoration as you were talking about today, took place. And we've done other things like that as well.
Do you collect data?
We assist ODFW in data collection.
What kinds?
Primarily, it's dealing with fish, as far as the escapement and what was the spawning, what's the return of the adults, and what projections of what the future looks like.
Is that mostly about the salmon
Salmon and steelhead.
and steelheads?
Yeah, it's rough right now. We're having a lean year, and it doesn't look real pretty at the moment for the near future. So, as far as the Chetco bar fire, it is hard. There's other variables there. I mean, we're getting poor salmon returns right now, but that Chetco bar fire was in 2017. So the fish that come back would be 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So we're still, next year we'll have an indication what that impact might be. But then you've got all these ocean conditions that are also affecting the returns. There's a lot of things going on, so we got to pick and choose our battles, I think.
Is anyone doing any testing on the fish, the meat of the fish, to see what's in there? What are they bioaccumulating? How much plastic are they consuming?
That I don't know. Not as far as the salmon that I'm aware of. I do know they started a genetic test down the Rogue River recently.
We can do that from the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So,
anyway.
any other, Any other ideas? How could you support some of what Miranda's been talking about, or the sorts of things that the fishermen organizations do?
Well, Miranda, do you have any volunteer jobs that,
We don't currently, and sometimes, yeah, managing volunteers is a little more effort than it's worth, but we are, our new monitoring coordinator is, he's going through all the past data, and he's thinking about how to integrate that into our monitoring program. We did have a program called Storm Chasers for a long time, where folks went out, volunteers went out and collected turbidity, how much suspended sediment is in the water after storms.
You would have to do that last Monday here.
Yeah. The other issue is data is pretty worthless if it isn't collected with a plan. You can't analyze that data very, very rigorously, or if you don't have a sampling plan. So I think that's something that Robbie's working on right now, to make sure that what data we do collect can actually be informative.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Question, how about maybe persons being aware of reporting places where if they're seeing massive erosion and turbidity coming into the river, or there's problems, we're letting you folks know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't have all the eyes on the ground, so that's helpful.
It seems like I remember people would have their own little weather monitoring stuff, and then they would phone it into, I don't know, weather.com or NOAA or something, just to track storms and heat and cold and things of that nature. There's got to be other kinds of programs like you're doing with the fish on different subjects that would be relevant. I just don't know what they are, but they got to be out there.
Yeah, the one I mentioned about sudden oak death is they're using an app on the phone. It's called like not Snapchat, Snap something, where you just take a photo. If you see a disease-resistant tan oak, or what you believe to be disease-resistant, you just take a photo of that, and it geolocates it, and you send it into ODF, and they have that picture and location. So yeah, something like that with, like you were saying about where there's excessive turbidity, or yeah.
Or if we know anybody that's a large landowner that would want to work with you guys, we should push them in your direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question on social media, because I do follow social media, and as far as finding out when things are happening, or meetings, volunteer stuff, whatever, where it's people that may not be educated but want to do something. What's the best Facebook or social media page to go to? Is there anything like that?
For our work?
Huh?
For our work specifically?
Or anything that's, you probably would know more about your specific organization.
Yeah, we're terrible at social media. We don't have anything currently, but we do have a new outreach grant, so we're getting a new website.
Your brochure was excellent.
Yeah,
too.
that's a new.
Yeah, the brochure was excellent.
We do have a website,
Yeah.
and you go to our website. It's currywatershed.org. Other social media. Well, I would have to think about that.
You raise a really good point, because as you can see, we are finally getting a relatively more diverse crowd here. And up to this point, we haven't been able to tap into the people that will be most affected and that will have most at stake. And we've been trying to identify people that can help out and saying, this is the kind of social media platform that we should be putting things out there, and this is the kind of information that would be helpful to people. So if you can suggest somebody, or if you yourself would like to help out on that, that would be fantastic. We really need that sort of thing. And I emphasize it because it's your generation that will be most impacted by this. It's your kids' generations that's like, whoa, we gotta get something going. And tapping into that is really important.
I wanted to connect with somebody here actually, or whoever, because I'm trying to build my own business and I'm realizing how many people are telling me, oh, just post on Facebook, or oh, just this and that on social media and websites and stuff. And I'm like, okay, but how many people actually see those websites? I think social media is just so prevalent for so many, even like older folks. And I've known many older folks that are totally into social media now, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though a lot of people hate it, I know I hated it at one point in time, it's like, okay, well, it's the quickest way to get everybody to know that stuff's happening. And so, yeah, I'm definitely interested in trying to get into that more and posting or creating something.
Yeah.
So.
There was a couple that was here for 2 to 3 months, and they had worked in Alaska for a while. They're living in Colorado, and they had been part of the Climate Reality Project, which is the training that the Al Gore's nonprofit has put together. They're now traveling around the country for a couple of years and stopping in different places for about 2 to 3 months and identifying what are the organizations in different places that need to be connected. And for us to partner or at least be part of the watershed, the different parts of watersheds, be part of the Fishermen's Association, to be part of all these different groups is very, very important. How do we get past the unintended barriers is a challenge. They are doing a really good job of connecting up people. And if you want, I can give you their website and some other information with that. Another aspect of it is to be able to have our talks that would be archived, that would be available as podcasts, that would be available for people that don't want to take the carbon footprint of driving here from Port Orford, from Crescent City, from Chicago, to be able to listen to it. I mean, it's very easy to do if you know what you're doing.
And by the way, kciw.org, it's got Reality Check as one of the shows. And we did an interview with Miranda on the same subject. Her and some of her cohorts that are part of the partnership all came down. And so if you want to do a little follow-up, finding out more about her organization and what they're up to, check it out at kciw.org, Reality Check.
KCIW at what?
.org.
Oh.
And then go under programs and podcasts, and then you'll find Reality Check. And there's a lot of climate stuff on that show.
And that's another place you can get involved too, because KCIW is always looking for volunteers and money and all those things, but it's a nonprofit radio station, so it's a good way to connect people.
And in general, for more information about climate change, do check out SOCAN.eco
Yes.
/coastal for us, right?
Correct.
But if you just want general information, our parent organization is out of Medford, and there's 1,400 people involved there. We're like a little satellite of theirs. And so SOCAN.eco, eco is the general website, and there's a huge resource there.
And if you look at the flyers, or you look at our cards, it's got a QR code, so that you just scan it, it'll take you right to our page.
So you have to print a lot of paper.
And we need people to say, all right, what stuff would you like to see on there? And how could you link it? How all of a sudden can we have this information accessible? That's the real key that we're working at.
That's on the website?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would think a common social media platform for the organizations in our community that are partnering and are dealing with these same issues would be a great idea.
It would be a good idea.
Yeah.
We should all pull together.
So Deb had started a Facebook page that...
And I'm sorry, I've not touched it in a month, so it's my bad.
But that's where we need, even if you have an hour a month, you can be contributing in different ways that'll help out, make that little bit of it. Are you?
Miranda, I had a question. I watched a commissioner meeting a while back, and I believe the statement was made that the Watershed Council was taking specimens, doing tests on the Rogue River on a regular basis. Is that the case? Do you know the nature of that testing? Is it pH? Is it just bacterial? And to follow that, what testing is being done on the Chetco River? And even if you know, like, is it a regular location, or what can you tell us about that?
I know that Kelly Timchak, who's the Lower Road coordinator, collects E. coli samples on the road regularly, as well as temperature samples. I don't think there's E. coli testing in other rivers, but it is something. We actually just applied for some money from DEQ and didn't get it to expand that E. coli sampling across our watersheds, and that would have been a volunteer-driven effort. But there is, that data is uploaded to swimguide.org. So
Is it safe to swim?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll tell you that information if it's based on those samples.
I think the Chetco's had some temperature studies. I know somebody's been, in the city just approved a new river gauge, so they'll have
Yeah,
some,
there's
they'll have some information from
flow
that.
data. DEQ collects
Yeah.
temperature and flow sample, maybe, is it DEQ? Yeah, samples on a regular basis.
Because the temperature is really the most important thing on the river. The temperature, the dissolved oxygen in the estuary, and like the turbidity.
Did that answer your?
Well, I think that you mentioned ideas. It seems like if you want to kind of kick something off here on the Chetco, if you took regular samples, I don't know whether that means daily, whether that means, I'm not a biologist, so I don't know, but daily, weekly, monthly estimates, and if there is encroachment on the estuary from rising oceans and what have you, those would be the ways that we would find that, and whether that's pH levels, it seems like would be, as a non-scientist, I would guess, but I think that would be something doable, maybe even at the high school if somebody recommended.
Yeah.
I mean, if we could just, I'm thinking even the college, if I tried to kind of kick something off where we went down and somebody on and I don't know, would it have to be daily? Would it need to be weekly? What's the right location? Is it like Social Security bar? Because that gives us a little bit of sense of what's going on just above isn't that just above where the water's taken out from the city?
Yeah, it is just above. But I think the high school has an ecology club now. I don't, it's like 3 students right now, but that would be a good source.
Actually, her and I were co-leaders of that club.
Oh, cool.
It's not that popular yet, but we hope to make it more popular. And for us, one of the biggest things about it is like trying to get people involved, which is actually, it's surprising how many people don't care. But it's just kind of yeah.
It's an over
So,
50 group.
Yeah, or they feel hopeless or something.
The high school. Yeah, the high school.
That makes me happy to see that you guys here, because those, I've done water monitoring, and it's more helpful if you're younger to go into the water and with the hip boots, and because you're not as afraid, you're not going to get hurt when you fall. And it's good to see that the high school is doing that.
It sure seems like monitoring the salinity near the pull-out point or anywhere along, just to see the difference over time would be really, really useful for this community.
And I think, as Miranda said, in order to make a meaningful data collection effort, you need to have a plan, and you need to understand what is the question you're trying to answer. That's what's important. If you're looking at fluctuations in salinity with tidal cycle, then you've got to be there a lot. If you're looking at changes over between neap tides and king tides, the sort of overall cycle, maybe once a day, always at the same time, always at high tide, always at low tide, having the right sorts of sampling containers. If you're just looking at salinity, probably won't be that big of a deal. Looking at oxygen, that changes so quickly, you gotta fix it unless you have the, the probe there right away.
Yeah.
But what's neat is the planning of it, the execution of it, the coordination of it. All of those are incredible opportunities for people to learn and to get engaged. Because, I mean, I spent a lot more time out, actually underwater, than being in the lab. It was a lot more interesting, and people do want to get involved. And so we really want to work with you guys to figure out how can we have things that are of interest. And when we talked a couple of weeks ago, I had posed the question, in high school, what are the areas, what disciplines would climate change be of relevance? And I really liked some of your answers, which included, well, science obviously, but English. What was, one of you said English, right, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, and what was the answer? What was?
It was having articles on the ecosystem and climate and stuff like that, so it's kind of like bringing climate change into realization by reading about it, because I mean, we have to read English anyway.
Yeah.
So why not read about something useful, beneficial?
Speaking of books, this is a really great book about climate change, sea level rise. But just, you're talking about the connection between English and climate change. There's a part in this book that talks about how important just words are that tell us about certain elements of the landscape, and how that lexicon can kind of tell a history of what things used to be like, maybe. And so, yeah, I think books are great, and they're great for spreading knowledge. And
Yeah.
For me, one of the things that seems really exciting is if we can get the younger people involved and get them excited about it. I went to a high school that we were extremely environmentally conscious, and through our years, we've kind of forgotten things and went our own way, and we always opposed, big motorhomes and things like that. And then, like as we got older, it's like, oh, that motorhome sure would be nice. But if we can get the younger people excited about it, they're the ones that are going to live with the change 40, 50, 70 years from now. Most of us not going to be here. You guys and your kids are the ones who are more going to be there, so we need to not just get you educated, but get people excited and get them talking about it and getting involved. And there's hundreds of different ways to get into it. We were in tree planting projects when we were young. Up here we've gone and studied about the mushrooms. Those are, there's just thousands of different things that can be brought into the school and that can branch out, as long as you're, if you guys are the spearheading it, then partner with other people. Coming to this is a great thing, and just get involved in as many things as you can, and watch other programs and see how you can bring it to yours and get the entire school involved, instead of just you carrying the whole load of correcting problems here in the environment. Because if you get them going, you're going to be able to talk it up further to other people. And just, I think our environmental group in high school was like 75 people. We went to Watersheds.
I went to a large high school and we were 3. I had to be the secretary and the treasurer.
Now, one of the aspects about that is really important is, I used to manage very big projects, and I'd have 100 people, but I'd tell everybody that their contribution was critically important. And you go, yeah, well, the scientists are just like, yeah, I once turned in a proposal for $3 million, and later somebody said, when it was coming off the printer, I think every page was upside down. We never heard anything. So the point is that I don't care who you are, what you do, you have a role you can play. It's really important. It's very important to say, all right, I have a lot more time than you guys do. More than anybody that's got a day-to-day job, especially if you're trying to get kids to soccer and do this and do that. Tap into the resources that you've got so that if you want to be involved, even if you've only got an hour every 2 weeks, that's fine. That's the sort of thing that stimulated that stimulate the question about having a website or having social media, things like that. Then you sort of distill it down to bite-sized chunks, things that you can actually do. And the best thing about it, if you do that, then you're involved. And that's why, as we've said many times, there's the stuff on the inside here. When I give talks, I say, look at these things. Look at the sorts of stuff that you can do. And most people are going, well, I can do that. In fact, a lot of people say, I do that. I said, you're a climate activist. If you take our cards, and if you give it to your fellow students and say, hey, look, these are some things that we can do. Getting things started. Because then they'll start asking some questions. And then they'll want to be involved. And then they're vested. And once they're vested...
One thing that they need to do is talk to people that can make it, that have some authority and have some, like, are you talking to the Curry County, to the county, our county supervisors? Yeah.
I would say talk to everybody.
Right.
Because the people that have the authority right now, Greta Thunberg has gotten the equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize, a $100,000 grant for her activities. A year ago, you'd never heard of her. She sat alone in front of the Swedish parliament striking for school. So one person does make a difference. The person that doesn't seem to make a difference absolutely does.
We had a question about there.
One thing that I think would be a super good idea to make students more aware of what's going on is if we presented an idea to the principal about adding a curriculum about the environment and having, there's this one teacher named Miss Tuttle, and she's really big on the environment, and she's a super, super great person. So like, there's teachers that could teach about that, and that would be super great if they could add a curriculum about that.
Absolutely. I so wish that those were offered when I was in school. I would have taken those classes in a second.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more students that probably would if they were offered. I don't know, I think that they took away a lot of stuff since I've been out of school for 10 years, and it's like, wood shop is gone, art is like not happening anymore. Like, it's there, but it's not like it was. And it's like, are you serious? So it's like, yeah, I mean, some of those things aren't as important as they used to be, but there's plenty of other things that they can easily plug into, like an elective science class or an elective humanities or anything like that. It's like totally useful, and that students like may actually have to take because it's part of their electives or whatever. But something that's like, I know when I started going to college and I heard like, okay, this is your selection of things that you have to take, but then you have all these choices. I don't know how much you guys can choose on your electives anymore.
Quite a few, but there's not really like a huge variety.
Right, but if you had more variety, then people might steer towards one thing or another a little bit more.
So you were talking about the English class, where you could introduce that as a book. That's a good start. I was in speech and debate and public speaking, and so those are things that you could push that as like, hey, let's have an environmental caucus, environmental caucus here. And I don't know if you guys are interested at all what's going on in the political work, but there's things called caucuses, and so you can get involved in those. Take an interest and see whatever you can stick your nose into. It's like, hey.
I think that class for you. How else can we support you besides getting it in the curriculum? I mean, there used to be a thing called Senior Project.
Yes.
And we could help people, mentor people who wanted to do a senior project about climate. Any other ideas you might have like that, please share them.
So one thing
I have a question
think
about,
Hold on.
If we were to have someone such as yourself come and talk to the principals and maybe present an idea, or maybe us as students could present the idea to the principals, but talking about getting a class, or an elective, I should say, for that purpose, and just kind of like making the school everyone just a little more aware of what's going on, because it is my generation that's getting affected the most and the generation next.
Yes.
And people don't really realize that, and they're not going to really care about it until it starts to happen and when it's too late.
Exactly right.
Exactly what you're asking for is what I've been putting together, and so it's getting those discussions and the connections going. Sorry.
2 years ago, I moved here from Santa Cruz, California, and for about 10 years, I was through University of California Long Marine Lab. I was doing weekly lectures and presentations about global climate change, the impact on pinnipeds, whales, and the whole picture, and leading tours. And I do not know a place to fit in up here. I've got a depth of knowledge around this subject, and I can give talks and presentations, but where do I fit in?
Talk to me.
Right here.
I have this habit of getting to this point where everybody's talking, and then I look at my watch, and consistent with how Dave runs his meetings, we promised you we'd be talking from 5:30 till 7. It's a little after 7 now, and I hate it to get everybody excited, but some of you do have to leave, some have left, and I certainly don't feel bad about that. We have the room until we leave, which is good, but y'all are going to get hungry. That's not that great as popcorn. So for this, I did say that a month from now, we're going to have a speech or give a presentation by Tom SOCAN. Tom has been, as Ed mentioned, he used to work for the USGS. He worked for Fish and Wildlife Service doing their climate change programs and things. He's got his own website. He's done courses that are online if you want to see him. Absolutely recommend be here and bring as many people as you can a month from tonight here in this room, 5:30. And
Wednesday.
that's a matter of getting the excitement going, making those connections, getting people to come here so that we can start finding out what are the ideas, how do we connect the right people to those ideas to make things happen. And you've got my name on the back of this card, Ed's name as well, my email, even my phone on there. I'll say that I probably won't answer it because most of the calls are telemarketers, but I'll get back to you if you leave a message. So,
And you are welcome to stay longer if you want.
you're welcome to stay as long, but for those that have to leave, yep.
So the
CurryCountyVoices.com, click programs, and you'll be able to see this in about a week.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. This is
Welcome.
great.